Our next guest is on a crusade to improve literacy in America. He was a teacher and a millionaire real estate developer, yet he did it without knowing how to read. Then when he was at the age of 48, he had the courage to break his silence and now is on a mission to improve literacy in America. With us now, please welcome to the show, John Corcoran, author and president of the John Corcoran Foundation. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So people should know, I'm sure everyone does know, March, which is right around the corner, is, Reading Awareness Month in honor of Dr. Seuss. Your story is so fascinating to me. How in the world were you able to hide this for most of your life?
Well, it is a long story, and I wanted to, before I answer that question, I want to say that we're talking about the most important civil and human rights issue of this decade, and that is the ability and skill to read, write, and spell. And there's no way you can maximize your fullest potential without those basic skills. And I didn't actualize my fullest potential until I didn't have the opportunity to do that until I was 48 years old. When I went off to school at the age of 6, I was told I was going to learn to read, like my 5 sisters. I came from a loving home. I was told I was a winner. And by the time I was in the 2nd grade, I found out I was in the dumb row, and I didn't know how I got there, and I didn't know how to get out. So that was the beginning of my, I call illiteracy in America a form of child neglect and child abuse. And today, if I went to school, I'd be labeled learning disabled, and I'm dyslexic. The good news is that I learned to read at 48, and I went to a public library, and I had a volunteer tutor, and she got me to about the 6th grade level. I thought I died and went to heaven, and I had kept that secret for 48 years. From the dumb row, I was a little boy that had difficulty learning to read, and there's millions of us. And in this country right now, my story is still going on right now, and I think that's what drives my passion to break the cycle of illiteracy in America. And I know we all want to improve the quality of education for everybody in this country. And there's no equal opportunity for anyone if they don't have the basic skills of reading and writing. And that's the language of success in school. By the time you're in the 3rd grade, the first couple of years in school, you go to school to learn to read, and then the rest of your academic career, you read to learn. And so that really puts an arm behind your back. You're not going to succeed. So my experience, I want to tell you a little bit about, not only was I was a teacher that couldn't read, I was a little boy who couldn't read, and I was innocent, and little boys and little girls are innocent. And then by the time I got to the 5th grade, I was passed on, and we're still passing people on that don't get it. We're talking about 64% of our 4th graders in America, across America, in almost every school and school district in America, 64% of our children are not proficient readers. So we have an epidemic here. We have an urgency here. And my story, I guarded my secret. I was so embarrassed and ashamed. It's a shame-based secret. But I was just full of joy when I did learn to read. And I was asked to share. And I do want to point out that I had a volunteer tutor that was a brilliant woman who didn't have any education background, but she thought she didn't think anybody should go through life without knowing how to read. So she took the time to work with me, but I outgrew her skills. You can have a good heart and you can have a good art, but you got to have the science of reading. And if we've done anything right in the last 20 years that gives me hope, is that we now know a lot about how the brain works and how it learns to read. And we do have the science now. We have a gap between what we know and what we do. And I think I'm way off the question.
That's fine.
But John, I'm thinking it must have been exhausting for you to go through life and hide this secret.
Well, I didn't know how exhausting it was until I learned to read. And I said, whoa, that's a lot of work. It's and a call for memory. And there were a lot of assets that I did learn and coping skills that I did learn that had some value. No, it was more than that. I think it has an adult, and I was an adult when I learned to read. We're suspended emotionally, and there are millions of adults. I've shared my story with millions of other adults. I've talked to incarcerated men and women, and our prisons are full of little boys and little girls that grew up and ended up in the prison system or the justice system. And our story is the same, with the low self-esteem and the shame and the embarrassment. And we're suspended in our childhood, emotionally, psychologically, academically, intellectually, and spiritually, in a variety of ways. But it has a horrendous impact, and illiteracy has tentacles that reach out at so many things and facets to the individual and also to our country. I mean, you think of any problem, and the good news about illiteracy or literacy and learning to read is that we now know, science tells us 97% of the people, if you can talk, you can learn to read. And there is a gap between teacher training. Teachers have not, and I'm not blaming. I want to see teachers trained in the science of teaching. And my volunteer tutor, she ended up, in retrospect, I'll use this language as the ambulance driver that got me to the reading clinic with Pat Lindemuth, and who was a pioneer in science phonetic awareness, and I had some issues there, and they were identified and diagnosed, and they were treated. In 100 hours after I met with Pat Lindemuth, I went from the second word attack skill to the 12th grade level. So it exploded. And one of the things adults do, and John Corcoran did, was carried with him. I bought into the big lie. I bought into the lie that something was wrong with my brain. And I think we're all traumatized in childhood in a lot of different ways. But being in the dumb row and being told that I was a winner for six years and going off in school, and my first impression with school was they didn't know what my parents knew, and by the time I'm in the 5th grade, I'm a behavior problem. The same, and I was disrupted. I was in front of the principal's office most of the time. I was expelled. I was suspended. And by the time I got to 8th grade, I decided I had athletic skills. I said, I'm taking the short end of this stick in school. I'm going to change. And I'm going to start whatever it takes. I'm going to kiss up. I'm going to behave. I wanted to be on the athletic field. So I maintained, and it's a true story today. If you behave yourself in high school, they'll give you a diploma. And they claim they're not, but they are. We're still passing not this last year, but the year before that, they passed out high school diplomas to kids that were reading at the elementary school level. And so what my story did at the age of 48, I told the truth. I guarded the secret. My wife was the only person that knew I couldn't read. I taught school for 17 years in a public high school. And I want to say, as a child, I was innocent. And I don't have to apologize for anything that I did as a child. A teenager, teenagers misbehave. They're a little bit on the crazy side, and then they grow up and become a little bit more civil. But as a teacher, I think I owe the literate society, because it's a moral dilemma for me to go. And I graduated from college also. That's another story that's a little bit different from the innocence of a little boy. Because when I went to college, I went I got into school on a full athletic scholarship, but I stayed in school because I found ways to navigate the system. And it wasn't the athletic department, it wasn't the coaching, it was my own deception and deceit and lies. And I had copies of exams before I took course, and I couldn't read. I couldn't write a sentence. And there's 1,000,001 stories that I could tell about every course that I ever took and how I passed an exam book out the window and had a friend put the answers in and passed it back to me. That was a kind of a minor thing. So that's what I did. And I lied and I cheated. And one of the nicest things about telling the truth is, and learning to read also filled a big hole in my soul. And I think America has a big hole in its soul too. And I think if America made a commitment to teach everybody to read, and America does promise an equal opportunity to everybody, and they're not keeping the promise if we're not teaching everybody to read. That's a requirement for full employment opportunities, and I think people that can read just have underestimated has underestimated the impact it has on an individual and the limited choices they have in their lives. And I just feel that we have an opportunity in America to teach the world to read. We have the science. If we close the gap between what we know, and one of the things, the universities that prepare teachers are as responsible to the parents as a second grade teacher. They are not properly preparing teachers. They are passing teachers through and they're saying, go out there, you'll figure it out. And there is a science to teaching reading. And,
so, John, with that, if I could ask, what was it that was different for you and how you were taught versus how you were able to learn?
I had and it's complicated, but I had a severe auditory discrimination problem. And it was identified when I went to the reading clinic. And it's in plain language. I could not, and the language, the English language is a phonetic language, and it has sounds. There is a code to it. It's like electricity, you know. If you understand that how that switch works. But with me, for example, auditory discrimination, it means I couldn't process the sounds. So if you were teaching me a sound like the sound for the letter L, it's ooh, and like my granddaughter's name is Kayla, and I pronounced her name Kaya, because I couldn't process. It's not my hearing. I couldn't process those sounds. The sound for L is la, Kayla, and so like the word, the sound for M is and your lips are closed and air comes through your nose. Well, I was taught what I was doing with my mouth, air, and so that's the big breakthrough. I was able to feel the sounds, and I couldn't process them. I still have, I still can't process them, but I can feel them. And so now I have the code. There's a code for breaking the English language down. I don't think I did a very good job of explaining that to
You did, and you broke the code. You learned to not only read, but now you've started a foundation. Tell us about your foundation.
Well, the foundation its mission is to facilitate the other literacy champions out there, and there's a lot of people of goodwill working very hard to break this cycle of illiteracy, and And then the mission is to prevent adult illiteracy, and you prevent it by teaching children to read. And for me, I believe it's as important to teach an adult to read in America today as it is to teach a child. And when I say adults, I mean teenagers also. We still are not. We have children that are being passed. If you don't get it by the 5th grade in school, chances are you're not going to learn to read in school. And today, still high school teachers don't think it's their job or part of their curriculum to teach kids to read. And how are they going to pass a history course if they can't read a book? And so it's when you look under the microscope, it's like, how is this happening? How does a country like America that sends a camera to Mars and sends a picture back and able to share it with the world can't break the code here? Can't teach children how to read, write, and spell? And it's something that we can really do. And to solve any problem, we have to articulate the problem. And that's what we, as you know, I mean, it's your business too, is that humans have been telling stories for thousands of years to entertain and to inform and to educate. And that's what I volunteered for when I learned to read. And I wanted to. At first, I didn't want to. I had a private life. I lived in the same community. My wife was a professional. I was a professional. I didn't feel like telling that story. I was just going to keep it to myself. Matter of fact, when I told my wife, they were asking me to share my story, and she said, "Why don't you just shut up and read?" But the little boy in me said, "Go tell them. They'll fix it." And the teenager said, "Don't bother." They didn't fix it. They didn't care, and they don't care now. And I'm going on what the little boy said. Fix it, and tell them. Tell the big people how painful and frustrating this is, and to break the code and teach us and make that commitment, and be trained and close that gap for the teachers. They need to close that gap between what we know and what we do. And the universities have to be a big player here, and they're not moving.
You're listening to 89.3 WBLD Orchard Lake, 88.1 WBFH Bloomfield Hills, and with that, John Corcoran with us here on the Megacast. He's an author and the president of the John Corcoran Foundation. You learned to read. You did have the courage to come forward and share your story. What's it been like for you to meet other adults that were struggling with the same problem that you went through?
We share our stories. We all think our problem was the biggest problem of all, and we had the hardest. We share that. It's almost like what I understand AA meeting is about. You gather together and you talk about it, and the only way you can get cured from illiteracy is learn to read. And once you learn to read, it's so, like I said, there's a big hole in all our souls. And in talking to other adults, they also have this passion to share their stories, and a passion to read and learn more and go to school and break the cycle. It's like I said, we are suspended in our childhood in different ways, psychologically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, academically, and we have to go back to our childhood. And it's more than just learning words. It's healing from the self-esteem and the loss of opportunity. And really, 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 what we have to do is forgive ourselves for not learning how to read, and forgive others for not teaching us how to read, and ask others that can read to share their precious gift with us and with others.
John Corcoran joining us on the Oakland County Megacast. He's the president of the John Corcoran Foundation and is also an author. And John, earlier on, you made a really interesting point that teachers, as they're being trained at the college level, are not being trained necessarily to look for these issues and find ways to solve them. So for educators at all levels, whether it be elementary, middle, high school, or higher education in the academics at the college level, what do they need to be looking out for right now? And if they have a student that is having literacy issues, whether it be just general illiteracy or because of dyslexia or a learning disability or an auditory disability, whatever the case may be, what should they be looking out for? And then what can they do to start the process of helping that student or those students solve their illiteracy issue and begin to learn to read?
I think they need to focus on the science of reading and not be distracted by all of these other things. We now know, 30 years ago, we didn't think dyslexics could learn to read. Weren't talking a lot about it. Dyslexics with proper instruction can learn to read. And 97% of the people. So the focus has to be, and even using the language of learning disability. If I would have gone to school, if I go to school today, I would have been labeled learning disabled. Okay, think about that term. The poor choice. We've outlived that term for one thing. Learning disabled, a human being. You're so arrogant that you think another human being isn't capable of learning. And it was a poor choice of words, 50 or 60 years, and it's outlived its time. And when a teacher is thinking, John Corcoran, he must be learning disabled. Hey, I learned a lot of things. I learned a lot of things about life, and I learned my timetables. I could count money before I went to school. So I think it's this attitude about all these excuses that we've created. And so I'm saying focus more on the training, teach a teacher how to teach, and in privacy. If I ask a teacher if they really know how to teach, if they were really taught at the university about the language, no, they weren't. And so in reality, I think if we concentrate on that more than any of these other sidebar issues and conversations and quit talking about, you know what, people ask me, what about accommodations for dyslexics? They have more time or they get accommodated. You know, the only accommodation I want, and for most people that can't read, you know what the accommodation is? We want you to teach us how to decode the language. We want you to teach us how to read and comprehend what is on the printed page. And the other piece of it, my oral language skills have improved. My thought process is different. And we're talking about kids today that can't think and don't have critical minds. And literacy is part of that. Our language is all connected to that. So it's so critical that we really focus on teaching the reading piece of it. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely.
Yes.
John, I'm a huge reader. Have been since I was a little girl. What's your favorite thing to read?
Well, when I first started reading, I read periodicals, short stuff, and my first novel. And I wanted to say something about you. You were blessed. You were probably one of those little people that walked by the library and got it. About 25% of the population gets that, and it takes them a while to comprehend how difficult it is for us to get it. I'm on the opposite end of that spectrum, and I think that. That's an interesting phenomenon. I read a lot when I first started reading. I wanted to read about reading, and how people, how the brain works. So that's a lot of it in periodicals. When I read my first novel, my little granddaughter was somebody like you, and she got it real early. 4 or 5 years old, she was reading. And I asked her one day, because we were learning to read at the same time, and I asked her, Kayla, do you see pictures when you read? And she said, of course. Well, good readers, that's what they do. And a slow reader is working on pronouncing and that was a real eye-opener, because my teacher, Pat Lindemuth, told me that once I start reading and with some fluency, I'll see the pictures in my brain. And I avoided novels because they were too complicated for me, and following the characters and everything. Now, when I read my first novel, it was such a joy, and it was a book that I was supposed to read in high school, and that was the first one. And then now I read novels, and when I can't remember people's names, I just give them new names, and follow them in the story. But novels were a little bit harder for me to read. But I love the newspaper and soft stuff, and that's 6th grade level in reality.
I still can't believe you were a teacher, and you had a driver's license. How did you pass the test to get a driver's license?
I'm a little bit older than you are. And when I went and got my driver's license, we didn't have to take written exams. Your parents drove you out to the fairgrounds, and the guy you drove around the lot, and you got your driver's license. And I got mine at 14, 15 years old. And I really didn't know how to drive when I got my driver's license. And that's, some of those things are under the wire, different things were. But I was a teacher, and I was, I had control in my environment, of my classroom. And I had aides that did my writing. They took the role for me. And by that time, I was the director of my own literacy. And I can tell you a story about being a teacher and living in fear. I mean, I was always in fear that I was going to get caught. I could manage the classroom. And I was the king of films, educational films, guest speakers. I probably still hold the record in San Diego County for guest speakers. I bring the experts
So
in.
that made you a favorite teacher, right?
Yeah, oh, sure. And we didn't have dumb rows. We had a circle, we had discussions. It was an oral environment, and I taught the way I learned. I learned by listening and talking. And,
What did you teach, by the way?
I taught social studies. I was also PE. When you're in public schools, you teach a lot of different things. But I could have locked down and this is I have a crazy story. I had a PE job. I could have stayed there. I could have locked in and not gone into the classroom. But I was bored, so I went into the classroom, and I did something. One of the things I did, when technology came around, remember where you could tape something on television, and one of the films, the Roots, was on TV. You guys remember Roots?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, that was a great piece, and I taped that. I showed that to my students, and I was pretty progressive to have a conversation about Roots at that time, and so I did some progressive things at progressive time, and I do want to say, I wasn't. Being a teacher was really a moral dilemma for me, and for other people listening to me as a, you can have some empathy for me when I was a little boy or a teenager and I couldn't read. But as a teacher, the bar's a bit higher, and I was an adult, and I made these decisions, and I can apologize for my sins, my crimes, my trespasses. to the literate world for being a teacher. I don't want illiterate teachers teaching. I want teachers to know how to teach children how to read and write. As a matter of fact, I think every teacher should know how to teach a child and an adult how to read. I think before they get out of college, they should have taught, just like nurses, they go into nursing, they know how to give an injection. I think teachers should know how to teach a child. Should be part of their credential.
But because of what you were going through and your struggles, did it help you identify other students that were maybe experiencing the same hidden secret that you were?
I knew, I can read them. I could tell. And even adults, you get a pretty good read on it. But, when if you think about the psychic, I was playing defense. I was the guy that defuses bombs, and you say, why would anybody defuse bombs? That's risky. It could blow up and kill you. But you have confidence that you know how to do it. And what happened to me, who suspects a teacher to be illiterate? Okay, it's a pretty good place to hide. I show you one experience that I had in terms of the fear and the frustration. I hated faculty meetings because sometimes the principal, and I was a teacher when principals were actually bosses, and they could tell teachers what to do. That's not so true today, but sometimes we'd have a brainstorming session in the faculty meeting. We had a faculty meeting every week or every 2 weeks. And I used to live in fear that, because the principal used to say, call on teachers in the room to say, John, put this up on the board. Let's get this down on the board, what we were talking about. And I lived in fear. And there was a podium in the room, but I couldn't always get behind that podium to hide. And I'm 6'4", so I wasn't invisible. But I always had a plan. If he said, John, get up here and do this, I would get up, take 2 steps, and drop to the floor, and I'd say, call 911. And I was always looking for, my back. And so I played defense. This is one of the really nicest things about knowing how to read and giving up your secret, giving up your deceit, giving up your lie. You don't have to be so defensive about everything, on guard. And so it has an impact on your personal relationships also. I told my wife when we were engaged that I couldn't read. She's a college graduate and she sees me as a teacher. And she just thought that I meant I didn't read much, like men sometimes would say that to a woman. And she didn't really realize how severe my issue was until I was trying to read to a child's book to our daughter, and then she realized that, and she did a lot of the writing. I couldn't write a sentence. I graduated from college and I couldn't write a sentence. It wasn't until I was probably 50 that I started writing, and I really love to write. It's a process that engages your brain, and you get to put something on a piece of paper. It's still a miracle to me when I write a sentence and I get an idea out there. It's so fantastic. And I know when you write, you better be more careful in what you say than what you say. So all of that was, I really dug deep into my psychic to understand the 2 dual lives that I lived, and I never lied to myself about being illiterate, and I always knew that was my problem, and I was always on guard and very careful. And there's a lot of details in my book, and a lot of secrets that I haven't really revealed. And like I say, I'm going to take them to the grave with me.
Well, we're so lucky that you've had the courage to share your story because you've inspired other people to come forward and to take those steps and to learn to read, because it opens up your world in ways that you probably never even imagined. John, it's been great talking to you, but I'm sorry we're going to have to say goodbye. But I could talk to you all day.
Yes.
I bet you have stories. I would love to hear some of those other secrets.
All right. Well, you'll be hearing more from me.
Well, we appreciate your time. We want to let people know JohnCorcoranFoundation.org is where you need to go to learn more information about John, his fascinating story, as well as his foundation and how he is using his story to impact people even yet today. Thank you again, John, for being with us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
We're going to take a quick break here on the Megacast, and when we come back, we're going to be speaking with another person that is trying to use their story to help others. This is the Oakland County Megacast.